What problem are we trying to solve for the user? Do they have the right workflow? Do they understand, from what's on the page, how to get things done? Are we making sure that the page is loading fast? So for us designers,
Welcome back to the show. I'm here today with Dee Sadler, and you may know her from CF United, where she spoke many times all about design things, which guess what? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Design thinking for ColdFusion developers. And we're going to learn 10 tips to make your apps totally amazing. And if you don't know Dee, she used to run a whole conference on design as well as speaking at ColdFusion conferences. She's been doing UX work for 20 plus years. From the front end, the visual, interactive research. And she's now in charge of herding cats. I mean, now she's in charge of a whole UX team of designers who are very easy to work with. And she is based now in New York City, though she did have a little stint in Boston recently. So she's currently UX director for Cox Automotive. And she's also on the board of directors for UXPA, what is UXPA, Dee?
it's a UX organization, it's an international organization.
Ah, all right. You're the big cheese then.
No. I'm on the board. I'm on the board of directors for the LA chapter.
Great. So we're looking at how to use design thinking for ColdFusion developers. And maybe we ought to just start off with what the heck is design thinking, because not everyone may have come across that. And then we'll look at why CFers should be using this.
Yeah. So the definition is basically, it basically asserts that, a hands-on approach to problem solving can be, is human-centered by, making sure that you are empathizing, you're defining, you're ideating, prototyping, testing, and implementing. And it's this continuous loop, really, of what it is, you're always iterating. It's never really truly done. It's kind of fits with Agile fairly well, in that we always want to empathize with our user first. Then you define what the problem is, more so than, thinking about the solution, being first. Quite often, at least where I work currently, I hear the word feature all the time. We're going to put this feature in the software. And for us UXers, it is about what problem are we trying to solve for the user? Do they have the right workflow? Do they understand, from what's on the page, how to get things done? Are we making sure that the page is loading fast? So for us designers, we work really hand in hand with the developers to make sure that we know, is there an API that needs to be called? Is there, a service that, I'm not aware of, when I'm designing? So to me, it's a hand in hand working with the product owner, the developers, and myself, or my team, to make sure that we are, doing all of that together. We're ideating together, we're creating prototypes, we're doing usability testing on a regular basis, and that, we're then implementing, what that is. So that's the kind of the basic. They define design thinking as, it's the design is the intent behind an outcome. Does that make sense?
Well, it's the way you go. It's the way you go about creating the user experience. and the intention you have for the user experience in this particular app.
Yeah, it is. It's really definitely all about having empathy, for the user, and thinking and writing, your epics and your stories with the user in mind. So what's the user trying to do, instead of, I see so many stories being written about just trying to accomplish something in the software. Yeah. So I think for me, it's a total writing of stories differently as well, making sure that you've got the user in mind. So as a sales manager, I need a way to, etc. Instead of, the software needs a way to do whatever it is.
Now, a story is like a use case, or is that a special UX word?
No, that's a special, that's a word in Agile.
Mm.
So quite often, we're trying to get people to think in terms of Agile, where it's, you're always iterating. That way you never feel like, you're done. You may have a date that you want to get a piece of software out, but that doesn't mean that you need to have 1000% of it perfect before it's done. That's waterfall, right? Mm. So in Agile, we try and, put out there, the kind of the minimum viable, product. What can I get out there that would help them get whatever done? And then we can iterate to add, more things to it. As a UXer, we try and design the future state. So, I'm always looking at a roadmap of, 3 to 5 years. I'm in a software company where they can't think more than, a quarter or two ahead. So sometimes it is me then thinking, okay, so what's the 1 to 3 year instead of the 3 to 5 year? I will design for that future state, and then we can all then iterate towards that. So you are thinking about putting out, smaller chunks of something, towards that goal, instead of, if you don't, then you're just going to Frankenstein stuff, right? Mm. We don't want Frankenstein products.
What do you mean by Frankenstein products? That they're coming back from the dead and they've been chopped around a lot?
I kind of think of that as, that's funny. If you don't design the future state, then you're just adding things, onto what you've got with no real plan in mind. So if you don't, figure out what should it look like 3 years from now, and then we build towards that. So we already know kind of what we want to do, and maybe sometimes the technology isn't quite there yet to make sure that that's, also available. So if I wanted to put an AI in my software, or design or machine learning, it's like, maybe I've designed something that requires that. Well, maybe where I'm at the time the company isn't quite, ready for that. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you've got to, or voice enabled, or, whatever the heck that, it is that, we want to try and get to, and, just maybe we're not quite there yet. So otherwise you have the intention of, you have good intentions, but sometimes then you start adding, what I hear all the time here is, well, we need another button to make sure that happens. And that doesn't do anybody good. More buttons isn't, a solution.
Why is not adding a button a solution? Or what is the solution?
Well, the solution is what I just, described, is making sure that you are empathizing with whom it is. So what we do as designers, kind of our process, if you will, is we will do the research to find out the demographics of who the actual user is. Quite often companies will, UX in general is, the idea we marry the business needs with the user needs. It's kind of what we do. So the business says, oh, well, our users need this, this, and this. Well, typically those users are the people that are paying for the software, not necessarily the actual users of the software. So it's the design team and hopefully the developers and the product owners that go, wait a minute, that's not who's actually consuming what we're creating. So
do you go out in the wild and capture one of these actual end users, or?
Yes. So we have hundreds of different research techniques, but the most common is actual user interviews. So we'll actually go talk to the people.
Talk to them? Isn't that dangerous?
Sometimes, yes.
Right. They might have ideas you hadn't considered.
Well, the questions are key. We try and ask, open-ended questions. We don't try and lead them to say that the software is already awesome and fantastic. And we're trying to figure out their pain points, really, and what they're using and how we can then make their workflow and what they're doing, you're always trying to find that transparent interface where they don't even know, they're just doing their job and they're making things happen and they don't even know how they did it. That's kind of what we try and always strive for.
So a transparent interface would be like if you had a paintbrush and you were doing a drawing with that. There's no interface, you just do it. And in software, you want something that's so easy to intuitive, you don't have to have a manual to figure it out.
Yeah, so that's the key, right? I don't have to put somebody through hours and hours of training just to get something done.
So let's look at these 10 keys to doing design thinking and see how they apply to the folks listening who are developing apps in ColdFusion.
Yeah. So I think the first one is really, being empathetic. That is the number one key. So you have to understand your user, and how this can matter is when I'm designing something or when I'm developing something, if I know how that the user would like to have it done, or what, if I keep them in mind. So what I typically do for my development teams is I take we end up creating personas for them. So a persona is based on research, it's based on data, it's based on, demographics, of the user. We bother to, go through all that pain just so that we then all understand who we're designing for. So it could be, Joe Jones, is 54 and, he makes X amount of money and his motivations are this, and he's, he's not very tech savvy and, et cetera. So you try and find out, their behaviors, their motivations, kind of like who this person is essentially. And we look for the 80% rule. So we're not just, randomly coming up with, somebody in mind. It's always based off of, the data that we can get about the actual users, whether it's male or female. I try often to have, if it's appropriate, to have a female as maybe a secondary. If the main user, we talk about the 80-20 rule all the time in UX, so I'm always, looking for that, the main flow. So who, you've always got outliers when you're creating an application, especially.
Now, I've
So
heard of the 80-20 rule, but
yeah, well,
what exactly is 80% of what is
so
20% of?
the way that so like 80% of our users are male, and whatever that
Oh,
is,
okay.
that's but we apply that in how we look at a flow as well. So I'm looking at creating an application. I'm also looking at, so what do the majority of people, how would they use, this software?
Mm.
So it's always a consideration that, we just call it the 80-20 rule just because it's just whatever is the majority of the time that people, what are they going to, what are they trying to accomplish?
Mm.
So we put the personas of these people, up and so that the developers can understand who it is that they're designing for, so they can be empathetic, towards that person. So I always ask myself the question, would this person do, whatever it is?
Mm.
So that way, you're like, oh, well, this is, is the easiest way to do this, A, B, C, whatever it is, but would the user do it like that? So that, in essence, is what really kind of drives everything, is trying to figure out, would the user actually do that? And we have, and then we'll have the research, et cetera, to back up, that hypothesis of would they do, this thing? How would they like to work? We're doing surveys and interviews and, always observing. That's probably my favorite thing to do. I work at a automotive software company. So it's our users our primary user is a dealer, from a dealership. So it could be a salesperson, it could be a, depending on what part of our software, we're looking at the time, it could be what we call an F&I manager. It means a financial person, along, because we kind of own the whole process of, buying a car. One of the major softwares that we have in the country, in the US. So we go out and observe. So I'm like watching the sales
You
guy.
literally look over their shoulder as they use the app.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then see where they get confused or...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because they get hung up. It's like, oh, so do they have multiple tabs open, to get something done because they want to see, multiple pages at the same time? Are they using somebody else's software to do a part of it? Are they going to, grab, some paper? Or are they looking at an Excel spreadsheet, trying to copy and paste, something, so we want the observation captures that when you couldn't do that through like Google Analytics or something like that. You couldn't actually view, all the different things that a person is trying to do. So that's why observation is probably, kind of the most essential, especially if you've got a complicated piece of software that you're trying to do. Observing them is key. It's like, what else are they trying to do to get their job done? Besides our software, is it, what else are they, trying to do? So I would say then it would be, be contextual, is also, really important. So just kind of, you want the user to be aware, of, kind of where they're at, in the journey. It's funny, being human, right? Seems obvious. I did a design thinking workshop last week for the services and APIs team, where I work. And one of the guys who is this big Russian guy, nice loud voice, was like, why should I have empathy? Why should I care about my users. Is just a developer. I'm like, really? Why should you care? They are then going to consume your service or API, right? You have somebody who's still going to use whatever that is, even if it's another developer. So it was kind of funny. We finally were able to, kind of talk him down off the ledge of, why should I care about who my user is? I'm like, well, they're trying to, consume it and put it in, an interface. So it still is like they're not dealing with an interface of any kind, but their user is. So again.
Well, at the end of the day, you want the user to trust your software.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's the, kind of be discoverable.
All right, this is the fourth point in the 10 points.
Yeah. No one wants to, look, deep for something. I think that's the kind of the main point. Is like, don't hide something. Don't make somebody look for the back button, right? Don't make somebody figure out, the true call to action on the page. Don't put so many buttons on the page that look all the same that they can't figure out, what they're trying to do. Even designers, though, this is a problem that I have with designers as well, is I used to work for H&R Block, and we worked with an outside design firm. And I couldn't believe that I had to actually tell them, it's like, okay, just because our logo is green does not mean that everything on the page needs to be green. I mean, they designed, like, everything was green, man. So, I mean, all the links were green, and all the graphics had green tint to them, and green this and a green that. And so then when you were looking at the page, you couldn't figure out what the true, call to action was on the page. What do you really want them to do? And so make sure that is really obvious for them. So if you're a lone developer without a design team, in a company, these are the things that, again, I mean, it's not always intuitive, to designers either. I can't believe the number of times I've had to remind people that, make things discoverable. The fifth one is the intuitive part. I think that's easier said than done. So this is also where, trying to find a designer or work with your, UX team makes all the difference, in the world, because you can say that you want something to be easy and intuitive. And that's a phrase that will make any UX designer kind of cringe, because you hear it all the time. It's like, it's kind of like, oh, well, can you make that sexier? Shouldn't that be a sexy application? Like, what do you even mean by that? It's one of those words that people say, but just like design means something different to every single person. You put 20 people in a room and they say the word design, and it's going to mean something different to every single person. The developers think of design in a totally different way that the designers think of design. So you have to be careful with those words. I try, and every time I start a new project, the very first thing I do is come up with a terminology sheet to make sure that we all can agree on the terminology that we're talking about, so that if I say design, it always is going to then mean this. If I say, I'm trying to think of another, the developers have their own lingo, as well. So I think that's certainly why I had my that's why I created that conference that I had. The Designer Developer Workflow Conference was all about how to communicate between designers and developers, and understanding each other, because I think that's kind of key as well. Have empathy for your fellow work people. Understand what business is trying to do. I've had my designers recently we have a lunch and learns with the product owners on what business needs, so that we understand what business we have empathy towards, the business side of things and what the product owners, are trying to do. We'll do the same thing with the developers, trying to make sure that we understand, their needs. And quite often, we have a whole huge teams, we have these, we call them caves of developers. It's kind of
caves.
Yeah.
I hope they're very well decorated caves.
They're very well decorated. The developers have really developed it. They've done a great job. Each one has their own name, like the Transformers and District 13, and they have all these fun cool names.
That sounds a little dystopian. District 13. That's the Hunger Games, right?
Was it? Oh yeah, it's true. And then like the Usual Suspects and that kind of thing.
Okay. I don't think I'm going to go into that cave. It might be dangerous.
That one especially, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then just kind of be clear. The sixth one then is be clear and concise. Make sure that you show that you understand the user's needs and just get to the point. Don't put a bunch of extra kind of stuff on the page that you don't really need. I come from the last couple of years. I've been in the healthcare software business where they try and put every little single thing on the page, especially the ones that were, I'm using air quotes, designed by the one person who they oh, I found this radiologist, and he helped me design this thing. And it's got every button imaginable, on it, and no rhyme or reason. It's but that's what the user wanted. Well, that's what one user wanted. That's not all. That's not a good sample set of all of the users that use, the software. We try and, even though doctors especially want everything on the page, they are trying to accomplish one particular thing. So, you want to give them focus, to that thing. So that's why, being clear and concise is important, to find out, and do that deep dive into what that user actually is trying to accomplish at that particular time, and give that the focus instead of just giving them everything they could ever absolutely need to have on the page.
Mm-hmm. Right, because you're following the 80-20 rule there, that you've got to make 80% of the tasks real quick and easy, the ones that they do the most. Yeah,
well, you should see some of the software. It was crazy before we got a hold of it. It was just every a rainbow of buttons. They had the different buttons and different colors, so they could. But they were all buttons on the page. It was quite crazy. So 7 is be learnable. I think that's fairly intuitive to kind of figure out.
Yeah, you want them to be able to just learn it easily. They don't have to go through training to use the software, which may mean that software needs to be simpler.
Well, I think that kind of goes with the really just the next 3 in general, which is, the be efficient, be delightful, be better. But I want to go back to the delightful part, just because Designers quite often use crazy words like that, but really what it means is, giving the user, making them happy to use what they have. Sometimes like the software that I'm using right now, or that we're creating right now, I'm not using it, but what we're trying to accomplish, these people are just trying to, the bottom line is for them to make money. The bottom line is to sell somebody a car. The bottom line is, to be able to make that sale quickly and, move on to the next one. So the delightful part is then, is the page loads fast and, they're able to accomplish their task in a very short amount of time. In design thinking, one of the things that IBM came up with is pretty interesting. So they came up with the idea, design thinking in general, you can look it up. Don Norman is kind of the godfather of UX and the godfather of design thinking. But IBM put a weird little twist onto the whole topic of design thinking, which was to find sponsor users. And I love that idea. It's really helpful for us as well. And what that basically means is, you find a group of your users, hopefully a good sample set, of the types of users and not just one type of the user. And they are then willing, for you to be able to test often. So like, for instance, as I'm working, we could come up with, some initial like paper prototypes that we could put in front of them really fast. And like in the concept of, do they get it? Do they get, how to, to do something? And then the developers can help create this thing, as a prototype, not, it's, to me, it's throwaway code, right? It's not necessarily real because there's going to be iterations, done to it. So then we put another, as we go along a little ways, then we put another usability test together, and maybe can they accomplish this task? So then you can, use this group of people to get in front of on a regular basis. And it doesn't negate the idea of doing, some final usability testing and then make iterations from that. But hopefully it's a group of people, a group of users that you can get in front of, quickly and often, so that you can then feel much better about, creating the final application. And you're like, oh no, I think we've made enough iterations now that we finally got it. And, now we can just make the crazy thing. And then we can always make, some changes later, but hopefully you don't have to make a lot of really major changes, because you've already, at least put, stuff in front of users and they get it or not. So I think that's the, delightful part of that. They also came up with something called hills. So it's basically the concept of, it's a military, kind of term of storming a hill. So what it is, it's who, what, and wow. So the who is your user, the what is what they're trying to accomplish. And the wow is measurable and time bound, so that you can, create that, how do we measure success? As I work with my designers, I'm always pushing them to do the reviews with the stakeholders in the terms of, what was the problem that you were trying to solve? Here's how we solved it. And then the third thing, which is always the most important, and when I'm looking at portfolios as well, is like, then how did you measure success? What was that measurement that made it successful? So the wow is, helps you then, kind of figure that out. And then and then I can create epics and stories, from that. So I can say, like a example might be, as a sales manager, I need a way to have my customer fill out their personal information so that I don't have to do it manually and maybe get something wrong, and it takes less time. So, I mean, I would probably, and then in a, in 5 minutes or less, so we try and make that, so the wow is, it takes less time, and in 5 minutes or less, it's more accurate than if they had tried to, type it themselves. Quite often the sales manager, for instance, they'll take somebody's ID and then they're trying to type in all the information when, it's way faster, right? If you did your own, you would spell your name right and you would put in your address right rather than somebody else, trying to do it. So it's just kind of an example of, how that might work out better.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing those 10 tips with us. It sounds like there's far more to it than just the UI. The whole UX thing is something quite bigger. It
is. But again, all goes back to just making sure you have empathy with your user.
So let's just pivot to a couple of closing questions, Dee. First of all, I know you're a UX director and you've got all these UX designers working for you. Why are you proud to be a UX director?
Well, I think, you mentioned to begin with that I was a speaker at CF United. I loved doing that. I love making sure that everybody works well together. I feel like I'm the cruise director on a ship where I pull everyone together. My key is communication and getting the developers and the product owners, business, and the developers all communicating well together. And I love doing that.
That sounds great. So, as you probably know, I'm on a mission to make ColdFusion more alive, because sometimes you hear these rumors that ColdFusion is dying, which is kind of ridiculous. I'm writing a book all about that. So why, for you, what would it take to make ColdFusion more alive this year?
That's a great question. I think we've kind of, I feel like besides yourself and maybe just a small handful, we've kind of lost that voice of how using ColdFusion can make your life easier rather than, Java or, some other, nonsense. And companies don't seem to understand, that, boy, they could have a whole, crew of really amazing, passionate. That's the thing for me with ColdFusion, and why I loved speaking at your conference was the ColdFusion developers are a passionate bunch and really seem to love what they do. And I know when I went into the rest of the world and I started working with other types of developers, I mean, they're a boring bunch, man. Like they don't have passion. I didn't hear anybody talking about, like, wow, I saw this, ColdFusion podcast where I saw, they weren't self-educating the way ColdFusion developers educate themselves. And I think it's a shame that we don't see, more of that. And, I think that would make a big difference, kind of like word of mouth, to influence companies, to use it.
Well, that's a great thought. So if people want to find you online, what are the best ways to do that?
So I'm on Twitter, always have been. So it's just, DeeSadler, at Dee Sadler. I have a website. It's aboxofpixels.com. From when I used to train as well. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and have fun in New York with all these caves full of developers.
Thanks for having me.